News 2 presents To the Point.
Death penalty delayed. A high-profile execution in South Carolina put on hold by the state's top court. We'll explain what led up to that decision and what's next. Second point, a South Carolina congresswoman sanctioned by Russia. We're breaking down what that means and the impacts Nancy Mace's stance on Ukraine could have on her re-election chances. And our third point, a Lowcountry representative is calling for new laws to protect car renters after he says he was the victim of a scam. We'll tell you how this legislation could stop you from becoming a victim. Hello, and thank you so much for joining us here for our first ever edition of To the Point, the show where we break down the political issues and elections that matter to you. And later in the show, our political analyst, John Brasini, will be in the studio with us, giving you in-depth analysis of bills being debated at the local, state, and federal level. Well, developing news as the state Supreme Court has put a pause on an execution that was supposed to happen in just a couple of days. Richard Moore was scheduled to die by firing squad in Columbia on April 29th. But now the state's top court has ordered a temporary stay of execution. Moore's lawyers called the execution methods unconstitutional since lethal injection was the default method at the time of sentencing. Since then, South Carolina has passed a law that lets inmates choose between firing squad or electrocution as their method of execution. Moore was convicted of killing a convenience store clerk in Spartanburg County in 1999. Moore's attorney, Lindsey Vann, says this pause is a good outcome for her client in the meantime, but she believes there is still more work to be done.
The evidence is clear that he entered into the convenience store without a weapon, which shows that his crime doesn't have the kind of premeditation that raises it to be the worst of the worst that the death penalty is supposed to be reserved for. And my hope is that this stay order now allows for time for that review to happen.
Vann says she is drafting a petition to take to the U.S. Supreme Court arguing Moore's execution. Well, state lawmakers are one step closer to bringing back a program for affordable housing tax credits. The state had to pause the incentives earlier this year because of the demand. News 2's State House reporter Jason Raven tells us how lawmakers want to bring this back.
Both the House and Senate passed bills that would put a yearly cap on the South Carolina Workforce and Senior Affordable Housing Program. Now, the House wants to set aside $25 million for it, and the Senate wants to set aside $15 million for the program. Now, the incentives were created in 2020 to match the tax credits developers get through the federal low-income housing tax credit program. Officials say the program led to the development of thousands of affordable housing units in South Carolina.
We had not one single person that was opposed to this program, and in fact, the reverse is true, that everybody believes that affordable housing is an absolute necessity in South Carolina.
And it's expected to cost the state about $16 million over 10 years. Instead, it's estimated that about $25 million in credits were approved in just 1 year. State lawmakers are looking to cap the program at a set amount and make the process for getting the tax credits more competitive for developers to ensure the program's future.
A little of something is better than a lot of nothing, and we would end up with nothing if we aren't careful.
Lawmakers and housing advocates say the program is much needed. According to the most recent federal data, nearly a quarter of South Carolina renters spend more than half of their income on housing.
Whether you need the affordable housing, whether your family needs it, where there are people moving into this state to work in our businesses need it, it's all relative.
Humanities Foundation President Tracy Doran says the state tax credit is the single most important thing lawmakers can do to increase the production of affordable housing in South Carolina.
As soon as the law is passed, those dollars will go right to work to create affordable housing across the state.
Now, both bills have been sent to the other body. Now, lawmakers could hold a conference committee later in the year to hash out their differences. In Columbia, I'm Jason Raven.
Community leaders are calling for changes to the proposed voting rights bill in South Carolina. This week, state senators debated the voting bill that would create 2 weeks of early voting and other things, but activists say it's not enough.
If we do not utilize those same tools by making sure that people have at least 30 days to vote early, making sure that people have drop boxes and a queuing process. Our process is doomed, and it definitely does not represent democracy.
The group is also calling for election officials to notify absentee voters if there is a clerical error on their ballot so that it can be counted. A new act circulating in Congress would help small businesses that own marinas to recover after a natural disaster. And it could have impacts right here in the Lowcountry. News 2's Raymond Owens spoke with Congresswoman Nancy Mace about how the act could help.
Well, they tell me the PREPARE Act would allow money to be available not only after a disaster has impacted a marina, but there's even money that would be available to allow them to prepare ahead of time in the form of federally backed loans.
The PREPARE Act provides lending opportunities for those who are struggling through the SBA.
Specifically, it would allow small businesses to get a loan to either prepare their marina for natural disasters, but also to help pay for repairs after a disaster occurs.
We sell boats. We're full service at both stores. We sell a lot of the manufacturers in South Carolina.
Chris Butler of Butler Marine has marinas in Charleston and Beaufort. He says the PREPARE Act could have helped him after disaster hit his Beaufort marina.
July 7th, 2021, and what had happened is there was a tropical depression that came up through. We didn't think it was going to be much by the time it got to my store in Beaufort, and at that time I had a dry stack in Port Royal right beside Beaufort. It ended up being a bigger ordeal. We had a micro tornado hit that came off of it that took out all of our, well, 90% of our docks.
Butler had to use $125,000 he had planned for new business equipment to make the repairs and insurance deductibles. With a PREPARE Act loan, he could have made the repairs and continued to grow his business at the same time. But often a storm can kill a business.
40 to 60% of all small businesses after a storm or natural disaster never reopen. Once their doors close, they're gone.
A lot of small businesses don't reopen. A lot of banks, if you're trying to go to a bank and say, hey, I just need a short-term loan to get us restarted, the banks don't typically want to lend you money when you're not able to perform, and that's where you need the backing of the federal government.
Congresswoman Mace tells me her proposal could become law this year, but it's more likely that that will happen next year. In North Charleston, I'm Raymond Owens. Count on 2.
Russian leaders have announced new sanctions against almost 400 lawmakers in Washington, including South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace. Last week, Representative Nancy Mace put this statement on Twitter. In part, she said she was sanctioned for supporting Ukraine and their fight for freedom. She also went on to say she believes the sanctions were in response to a bill the president signed on Friday that bans Russian oil and gas imports. She believes there are more sanctions that the U.S. should put in place against Russia.
We need to ensure that no Russian bank is part of the Swiss banking system, that no organization or company in Russia is part of SWIFT, and tighten the noose around Russia right now so that Ukraine can win this war sooner rather than later.
So, John, I am curious, we've been hearing a lot about sanctions in the news, and I'm curious, these sanctions in particular, are they more symbolic? I mean, what kind of impact could these have on somebody like Representative Nancy Mace?
So certainly, practically, probably symbolic. I suspect that Representative Mace probably isn't headed to Russia anytime soon for a vacation. I probably endeavor to imagine she doesn't have any assets that are held in Russian banks. So again, this is largely symbolic. This is in response to a lot of the sanctions the United States has placed on a lot of Russian individuals. You've got to remember, too, in the first round of Russian sanctions as well, they even named Hillary Clinton as an individual who was sanctioned. So again, largely symbolic. Interesting, there's a phrase in politics, certainly in the media, that all publicity is good publicity. So the more that Representative Mace's name is out in the public, more folks are talking about it, I can't help to think that that is actually helping her race for the Republican nomination in the 1st Congressional District.
That's what I was going to ask you about. She's gearing up for re-election here. Could this hurt her? But like you said, it's clear what the U.S.'s stance is on the war in Ukraine. So, maybe more news is good news, right? So
certainly her position is going to be, I'm standing up for Ukraine. This is a position I'm taking. I'm very passionate about it. You can even look at the fact that Russia has now sanctioned me. I'm so outspoken and outraged about it. Again, that will certainly play to a particular voting bloc. Interesting dynamics, what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine conflict within the Republican Party. And that certainly plays to a larger dynamic that the Republicans are battling with, sort of almost like a fight within themselves. You know, again, are you a Trump Republican? Are you not a Trump Republican? Hard to believe we're in the days now where folks like the Cheneys are not Republican enough for Republican voters. So certainly an interesting dynamic playing out there with Katie Arrington, Nancy Mace, again, who's backing the former president, who's not backing the former president. We've got endorsements. We don't have endorsements, but we're not endorsed, but I still support them. Very interesting dynamics going on there.
Definitely a lot to follow. Thank you, John. And Congresswoman Nancy Mace says she's actually raised $1 million in fundraising money despite former President Donald Trump backing her political foe. Earlier this year, Trump announced that he would support Katie Arrington for the District 1 seat. Mace says she raised nearly $1.2 million since January 1st, and most of that money was since Trump's announcement.
Next on News 2.
Next on To The Point, year-round school in South Carolina. Well, some lawmakers say it's the future, but parents aren't so sure about it. We'll tell you why. Welcome back. One Lowcountry lawmaker says he was a victim of a car rental scam. South Carolina Representative Wendell Gilliard says that Avis sent him a large repair bill for damages to a rental car. News 2's Riley Benson spoke with Gilliard and other victims who say they shouldn't be footing the bill.
The bill totaled more than $20,000 in damages to the car that Representative Gilliard checked out in late January. He says he received the bill weeks later, despite returning that car in mint condition.
Took the car back, no problem. Got my receipt, couple of $100.
Representative Gilliard rented a Lincoln MKZ through Avis for 2 days, returning it on January 27th. Weeks later, he was sent a bill by the company alleging thousands in damage.
She said it's not $2,100. It's $21,000. I said, you got to be out of your mind. You kidding me?
Gilliard wasn't alone. He says he's heard from at least 7 others who received similar letters from Avis alleging significant damage to a car they rented and returned at the Charleston International Airport, including Whitney Burleson, who returned a car 3 days before Gilliard.
Everything was fine. Left it there at the airport like I should have. I was like, well, this is ridiculous. I didn't cause any damage to this car.
Burleson was charged nearly $3,000. She complained the charges were dropped. Gilliard asked the airport to open an investigation. From it, authorities uncovered nearly a dozen cars have been taken by Avis employees.
There's some employees, after a customer like myself had dropped a car off, they would get in the car, go party.
Gilliard says he's still fighting the $21,000 charge and plans to draft state legislation to protect renters. He has also contacted the Better Business Bureau and asked the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to open an investigation.
This thing is bigger than what it looks on surface, and we're going to get to the bottom of it.
Now reporting in North Charleston, Riley Benson, Count on 2.
And South Carolina Representative Wendell Gilliard been very busy lately. He held his annual Resolution Awards ceremony last week at North Charleston Council Chambers. 9 people whose achievements range from the medical to political to education were all presented with awards. Former Representative and current cable TV analyst Bakari Sellers participated in the awards ceremony. Well, a North Carolina man is charged with stalking a prominent South Carolina civil rights attorney. Grant Olson Jr. is accused of stalking Bakari Sellers on social media using racial slurs, threatening to kill him. Sellers is a contributor on CNN who served in the State House from 2006 to 2014. Olson was booked into the Richland County Detention Center last week. A growing number of South Carolina school districts are switching to modified school calendars. News 2's State House reporter Jason Raven tells us some school boards are opting to shorten summer break, but add more breaks during the year to help lessen learning loss.
Right now, under South Carolina law, each school district's board can decide whether or not to make the switch to a year-round modified school calendar or keep a traditional calendar. Students would still be in school for 180 days of class, but the days would be more spread out over the year. Now, some calendars will have students in school for 45 days and then off for 2 weeks. Now, supporters of these modified calendars say it could help limit the summer slide and prevent staff burnout. Meanwhile, critics say it could increase costs and cause issues for older students who look for jobs during the summer. Now, the South Carolina Education Oversight Committee heard from school districts outside of South Carolina on these modified year-round calendars.
This experience has revealed many lessons from which to learn, such as making sure there is intentional collaboration and coordination with parents and community partners, and that there is an intentional focus on ensuring access to students in poverty.
Now, the Oversight Committee says they are just seeking more information and have no plans to recommend changes to the state's calendar.
The department has viewed this calendar as it was presented.
A memo from the State Department of Education sent out earlier this year says nowhere within state law does the South Carolina Department of Education have express authority over defining year-round modified school calendars. Therefore, the department does not define or approve year-round modified school calendars. Now, school districts that adopt these calendars must label the calendar as such. Under state law, school cannot start before the third Monday in August, except for schools operating on a year-round modified school calendar. In Columbia, I'm Jason Raven.
Now, the Department of Education says that districts in a modified calendar must have all statewide tests done at the same time as the districts using traditional calendars.
Next on News 2.
Next on To The Point, a deep dive into the governor's race here in South Carolina, what the candidates are up to, and how their chances are shaping up more than 6 months before Election Day. Welcome back. Our final point today, a quick update on the South Carolina governor's race and its top candidates. Governor Henry McMaster has raised more money than any of his competitors in this year's election. He's raised more than $5 million, including $600,000 in the last quarter. McMaster is one of 12 candidates seeking the governor's seat, and one of his top challengers, former Congressman Joe Cunningham, has raised $1.7 million. Candidate for governor Joe Cunningham, also in the Low Country this weekend, a number of events going on. He started Wednesday at the sound check for 420 Charleston at Holy City Brewing Company in North Charleston, and then he was part of the College of Charleston's Bully Pulpit series, ended the day back at 420 Charleston, where he spoke about his stance to legalize marijuana if he is elected governor. So talking a lot about money, how much is being raised for these campaigns, and John, I'm really curious for you to break it down. Where is this money going to? How are they using it to win votes?
So campaigns are expensive. They're really a terrible business model if you look at it. Basically, you have a fire sale and you've got one day, or a series of maybe weeks, if you want to be honest with, as far as absentee voting is concerned, to get your voters out. That's expensive. So you're buying television ads, you're buying yard signs, you are paying for your internet websites that you've got. You're trying to basically give folks as much of a channel to interact with your campaign as possible. You're hiring consultants to help guide you through that entire process. Again, it takes a lot of money to get a campaign going.
Definitely does take a lot of money. And you know, John, as we're talking about styles of campaign, Joe Cunningham sort of shifting gears with his Instagram and social media in what appears to be appealing to younger voters, you know, using TikTok, things like that. So tell me a little bit about the different styles and if you think the young vote is the most important vote in this election. So
social media certainly has changed the way that we politic now in this country. It's been that way for a little while now. You see folks gravitating more toward maybe trendier style sites, again, like the TikToks that you just referenced. You're going to need more than just younger voters, especially if you're running as a Democrat in South Carolina. You have got to focus on African Americans. They make up a tremendous portion of the voting electorate for Democrats. State Senator Mia McLeod is making inroads in that campaign as well too. Certainly Governor McMaster, his dream is to be governor of South Carolina, and he would love for more than anything else to be the first individual in state history to be a governor for a full 10 years.
So that's definitely a lot to think about. You know, as we do get closer to Election Day, we'll be checking in with John, of course, and just keeping tabs on what all the candidates are up to. As just our voters are watching this as well, voters in Charleston County, what are things that they should be looking out for as we get closer to Election Day?
Well, certainly issues that affect you. You've got to remember that in odd numbered years, we generally have local elections. Those have the biggest direct impact on your daily lives. Even number years, countywide races, statewide races, national races, but there's a saying in politics, all politics is local, and that certainly holds to be true in many aspects.
Well, John, thank you so much for being here. Your insight always so appreciated. And thank you guys so much for joining us here for our first ever edition of To The Point. We're about to wrap this show up, but hey, this will be every single week, same time, same place, so we hope to see you here. We're going to cover all the topics that you're interested in, and of course, if you want some special attention to a topic, you can always send us an email. We would love your feedback. Thanks so much for joining us.